Hi, everybody. Let's talk about how we can approach spray basting a quilt in ways that can be easier on our knees with no scooting around on the floor, easier on our backs, no leaning way over or awkward reaching, easier to line up the quilt, lining up a section at a time instead of trying to line up the entire quilt sandwich at once, and easier to stitch through. I'll share my trick for eliminating stickiness on the machine needle that can cause thread breakage as you quilt. And if you'll hang in there until the end, I'll show you my favorite tricks for working with larger quilts too. We'll start with my quilt top. My demo today will be with a baby quilt since it's a lot easier to film. But this process works with larger quilts too, as I'll show you at the end. While I often use unbleached batting such as Hobbs Heirloom 8020, I'm using a bleached white batting for this project because I don't want the batting to dull the bright white fabric in my quilt. I'll also be using a pool noodle from the dollar store, a broom handle from the dollar store. Now, each of these cost me about $1.25 US, a long yardstick or whatever ruler you might prefer, some inexpensive trash bags I can cut up to protect my work surface, and some painter's tape or masking tape to keep things from sliding around. About that broom handle, I like to slide one into the hole in the middle of the pool noodle. This keeps the pool noodle nice and straight instead of bendy and makes it a lot easier to keep everything aligned properly as I work. Lay out my backing fabric pretty side up, and it's okay if it hangs off the back of the table like this. Next, I used masking tape to secure the backing fabric to my pool noodle, making sure it's perfectly straight. And you can use pins for this if you prefer. Now, I'm just going to roll up the backing fabric bit by bit until I reach the end. Now I'm ready to add my backing fabric to my batting. I prefer to always spray my batting, not my backing fabric or quilt top. I'm using a light spray of 505, which is my preferred basting spray, as it has a very focused spray and washes out completely when I'm done. The adhesive is non-toxic and acid-free. It's also not as stinky as most sprays. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested, and you can let me know in the comments if you prefer a different brand. Note that I'm only spraying about 12 to 18 inches of the batting at a time, not the whole thing. Then I smooth the backing fabric into place, starting with my hands in the center and smoothing outwards towards the edges. And also notice I'm not leaning over at all. I'm pulling the batting towards me as I work. Now, this is a small quilt, but on a large quilt, the fabric will eventually pile up on the floor, so make sure you sweep or vacuum well ahead of time. I'll speed this section up till we get close to the end. I continue spraying, unrolling, and smoothing out the layers until I reach the end. Then I can pull off the masking tape and pool noodle. I also like to flip the batting and fabric over to make sure everything looks great on the other side, with no tucks or weird pulling on the fabric. Now we're ready for step 2. I've carefully taped my quilt top to the pool noodle. You could use pins if you find that easier. I'm spraying, unrolling, and smoothing out from the center, just like before. I'm also paying attention to the seam lines in the quilt, making sure they're nice and straight and that the corners of the quilt are square. This quilt is small enough that I didn't use my yardstick, but I am keeping a close eye on things. I periodically pick up the roll or pat the batting to determine where I need to add more spray. I don't want to overspray. By the way, those 2 pieces of painter's tape at the end of my backing fabric are just left over from the previous step. They're not actually stuck to the table. I'll pick them off in a minute. Let's fast forward again. Right about here, I noticed that the upper left corner of my quilt wasn't quite square. It's an easy fix. I just lifted the fabric and smoothed it out again. Perfect. Step 3 is one I created myself. I find it super helpful to heat set the basting spray with a hot, dry iron, drying out the adhesive completely before taking the quilt to my sewing machine. This will eliminate any stickiness getting on the needle. You can skip this step if you don't need to start quilting right away. It can dry out naturally. But if you're in a hurry, this works great. Please note, I'm using a large heat resistant ironing pad that protects my table from the heat of the iron. I'm also using a non-stick pressing sheet to protect my iron from any adhesive on the exposed batting around the edges of the quilt. You could use parchment paper or a pressing cloth if you prefer. Let's speed things up again. It's ready to quilt. Now here's a bonus tip. For large quilts, I join two or more pool noodles together to get the length I need. I also transform my work table into an 8-foot long staging area by placing a 4-foot by 8-foot piece of insulation board on top. This board weighs very little and can easily be stored in the garage when I don't need it. Works just great for large projects. I hope you find this helpful. If you do, please consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing. Either way, I hope to see you again sometime.